Thank you. That's certainly the most complete introduction I've ever received. I'm delighted to be back in Little Rock. I was here 9 years ago for the opening of the Clinton Library, and as I was saying to a few friends, I didn't see much of Little Rock because it was very wet and largely underwater that weekend. But I did have a great time here, and I'm really delighted to be back. I would like to thank the Clinton School because I'm really very honored to be here. I'd also like to thank Mayor Dabbs and Ward Davis for setting this all up and kind of making the connection. We have a connection through another organization that I've been involved with for a number of years. So with that, I'm going to walk you through what is really a kind of a 30,000-foot view of the notion of connecting the design of our physical places that we live in with public health. This is a new initiative, and I'm just delighted to be here to talk about it. I've been going around the country for the last 3 or 4 months talking to the urban land use district councils in various cities about this initiative, and we're trying to build some capacity and understanding within the organization, but to be able to come and speak at universities is really just a phenomenal opportunity, so I'm very appreciative. Let's see if we can get this going. Oops. So the Urban Land Institute is a pretty substantial organization. It's very much an international organization now. We've got about 30,000 members. I think about 25,000 are in the U.S. It's primarily a developer-driven organization, but as you can see, its mission is to really understand best practices and to illustrate those practices to the broader community with respect to land use. And I've been a member of this organization for quite some time, and recently I've become more active, and I want to just talk a little bit about this Building Healthy Places initiative. This is a theme that's really going to guide a lot of ULI's work over the next several years. ULI has been very involved and supportive of the smart growth movement going back about 10, 12 years, and I think this is really a natural segue. We really start making a connection and understand the relationship between public health and the kinds of communities we design and build. So health is a thread that will run through a lot of what ULI works on for the next several years. Through convenings and publications and so on, we're really trying to leverage the power of our organization to improve the quality of design, and particularly with an eye toward improving practices that have not been very productive in terms of public health outcomes. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But what we're really trying to do is raise awareness of the connections between health and the built environment in the real estate community and also the public community, and to make sure that health is really a mainstream consideration as we plan our cities and towns. We're also trying to kind of define the approach, help define and inform what are the best design elements, what are the best considerations, what are the best processes for evaluating projects, and for even how we do our buildings and the materials we use and so on. And then a really big piece of this is really exploring the value proposition. And what I mean by that is building an understanding of what the market and non-market barriers are to producing healthier communities, and to really create the business case to the development community that we need to rethink how we are designing and building, and then just basically advancing the state of practice and policy. So here are some of the health challenges, and this really explains why ULI is trying to exercise leadership on health. Really, how could we not? When the evidence that connects health and the built environment is really so compelling. Many of today's health challenges are chronic or lifestyle diseases. including cardiovascular and respiratory disease, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, cancer, which are directly or indirectly related to the built environment. So here are some sobering statistics. By 2020, healthcare expenditures will consume 19% of our GDP, up from about 7% in the 1970s. Obesity is a growing problem in Europe as well, and increasingly in Asia, as Asian societies have acquired affluence and developed a more Western middle-class lifestyle. Globally, 366 million people will have diabetes in another 8 years. 80% of these will be in developing countries. And poor air quality is shortening lives and eating into economic growth in Asia. Physical inactivity and unhealthy diet are second only to tobacco use and the main cause of premature death in the United States. So looking at these trends, we really need to do something different. We need to really think about changing how we build our communities. There are many forces at play when it comes to a particular individual's health. Medical care, personal behavior, genetics are all important, as are economic and social opportunities and resources. But according to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, living and working conditions in homes and communities and the built environment are a core determinant to health outcomes of people. So these are the precisely things that we can work on and we think we can help change. Healthy places, well, what can the real estate community do? What can isULI do? This is what we're trying to do. We're basically trying to build more healthy places, and we're really trying to define what these places look like. Well, here's what we think. They have stable and healthy affordable housing options, and I apologize for this slide. They have a variety of safe and comfortable and convenient transportation choices. They have access to healthy foods, parks, and nature. They use thoughtful design and make the healthy choice the easy choice, which is a phrase you'll hear throughout. And they use health-promoting building materials. So how can we get more of these places built? Well, where do we go from here? These are ways that we're trying to kind of move the needle. And we've defined 4 key areas of impact. As I said earlier, we're trying to raise awareness of the connection between health and the built environment through programs like this one and this publication, The 10 Principles. We're exploring the connection between health and the environment with other organizations. And we're also working to build awareness. And we'll be seeking to really create a better definition of which specific strategies developers and communities can use to promote health. And finally, we're looking for commitment from people who will join us on this effort. In talking to our own membership and to the broader real estate community, we believe that there are great opportunities for engagement. We can lead through a variety of ways, through their organizations, through political action and so on, and influencing policy. Dr. Richard Jackson, who is one of the really preeminent public health experts in the country, let me just move to this slide, and is the author of a couple of very influential books on the topic of the connection between physical health and the environment, has an expression. He was very helpful to us in forming these publications, and he has an expression that developers can be more effective in achieving public health than all the doctors in white coats. And he participated in our workshop. So I'll just talk briefly about the origins of this initiative and where we are. The isULI has had a series called the 10 Principles Reports. This new report on building healthy places is the first one in about 4 or 5 years, but as you can see, there's kind of a theme here. I think it touches on a lot of the subjects that you folks have been talking about in the speaker series, where you had a number of programs on both public health and urban design and smart growth and those types of discussions. Since as I said, it's been 4 or 5 years since we put out a new publication, and this was the first one, and I want to share some of the findings with you. The way this process started was that ULI has a service similar to the American Institute of Architects and the American Planning Association, where a community that is facing a dilemma of either physical planning or a political dilemma, a planning dilemma, can ask ULI to convene a workshop that lasts about a week. It's called the Advisory Service Panel. And this is kind of where my personal experience came in, because I've done about 12 or 14 of these panels over the last 20 years and I've chaired a couple. And a very interesting thing happened. The Colorado Health Foundation, which is a consortium of some private foundations, the state of Colorado, the city of Denver, the University of Colorado Medical Center, came together and they decided they wanted to create a new initiative to make Colorado the healthiest state in the nation. And they understood, but they understood that their understanding was incomplete, that the way we build our communities has a direct outcome on the quality of people's lives and thus on quality of life. So they engaged ULI to do 3 panels, all over a period of about 7 or 8 weeks. Each one of these panels, 7 experts, volunteers, various backgrounds within the real estate and public health fields, would go into a community, interview 70 or 80 stakeholders, and do kind of an assessment. And what they were looking for were really 2 things, 2 or 3 things. What are the things in the community that are physical barriers to people having a better quality of life? What are some of the social barriers? And what are the opportunities for improving the economic life of the community through better infrastructure, better programming that would improve health outcomes? And they had a competition. And they said they were going to pick 3 communities, 1 rural, 1 suburban, and 1 urban. And in each community they were going to do a panel. And then they were going to try and disseminate the various reports and get kind of an understanding of what the differences were and what the commonalities were. And the 3 communities, there was Lamar, which is a very small farming town on the Kansas border, High Plains town, very stressed economically. Arvada, which is an inner ring suburb of Denver, one of Denver's older suburbs. And then a community in Denver that is heavily Latino and has one of the lowest incomes of any census tract in the state. These 3 towns were selected, and we did panels in each of these towns, in each of these communities. And then 3 or 4 people from each of the panels came together in Washington and last August, and I, having chaired the panel in the Latino community, was asked to chair this overall workshop. And so ULI, there were 10 or 12 of us who had served on the panel, and there were 10 or 12 other people who were experts in public health, Dr. Jackson and so on. And they locked us in a room for 3 days and basically said, you got to write the book. So that's essentially what we've done. And it was an incredibly intense experience, and really a lot of, it was very interesting. And from that, we essentially developed this publication, and which I think has some importance in terms of laying out some basic principles. But as I'll speak to in a few minutes, it's also important because it's just the first step in a series of subsequent publications which really drill down on this subject. So these are Dr. Jackson's books, and he really, I consider to be the grandfather of this movement. He's been talking this talk for 15 or 20 years. So here are the principles, and I'm going to boil them down for you, but we'll look at each one. Principle number one, put people first. Why is this number one? Well, for decades, planners and developers have really been designing places for cars and not for people. And these choices have had some really significant unintended consequences for public health. One California study found that for every additional hour spent in a car, every additional hour spent is associated with a 6% increase in body weight. What should we be doing differently? To create an environment that encourages physical activity, traffic engineers, school boards, land use regulators must prioritize people over cars. We need to talk about moving people, not moving cars. Health should be a core consideration of development projects. Health impact assessment would perform a platform thinking through the health considerations of a neighborhood or a project, or just one way of doing that. Comprehensive community plans should incorporate health and make the connections between health and development really explicit as a goal. Second, in order to make all this work, we have to recognize the economic value. We're beginning to see research which clearly demonstrates that healthy places can create enhanced economic value for both the public and private sector. And that's not just for the builders and developers, that's for the neighborhood, the broader community. Millennials, baby boomers, others are increasingly choosing vibrant, walkable communities. Areas with mobility, local mobility choices, local parks, and retail nearby have been found to retain the value the best through the recession. Compact, walkable communities provide economic benefits to developers through higher home sales, enhanced marketability, and faster sales releasing than conventional development. And local governments benefit because local economic development improves. Developers and investors benefit from viable projects and added value. And individual citizens benefit from a more livable physical and cultural environment. So everyone benefits when people are healthier, and healthier communities have fewer medical costs. Principle number 3, empower champions for health. So one of the real challenges is generating a shared vision of community health, and that requires engaging a variety of partners across multiple disciplines. So we have to look in each community to find the champions, grassroots leaders, civic and political leaders, and local activists, and empower them to really lead change. For example, in Detroit, the farmers market proponents have been leading change in urban revitalization in areas that go far beyond just urban agriculture. So we have to look for partnerships in unlikely places. Principle number 4, and I would say these are not in any real prioritized order. These are just how they came out. Energized shared spaces. Public gathering spaces and other shared spaces like parks and pedestrian plazas, streets have a direct positive impact on human health. Vibrant community places offer opportunities for physical activity and for social and civic engagement. It's important not to assume that well-designed places will work on their own. They need animation, they need programming, and they need a rich array of programming. Streets are important, public spaces, that should just not be given over to the car alone. And a complete streets policy ensures that all users can be accommodated, cars, mass transit, bikes, and pedestrians. Living streets, which are designed for pedestrians and cyclists and social space where people meet with children and play, where children can play, is an important component of that. And flexible space can be made available for public gatherings such as pop-up parks, and parking space can be energized for other uses. I was just recently in the city of Vancouver in British Columbia, where isULI had a spring meeting, and it's absolutely fascinating to see what they've done on their streets. They just take the Jersey barriers and big concrete barriers, and they'll have a one-way downtown street that's 4 lanes, and they'll cut it off to 3 lanes, and they'll with the barrier, they plant a bunch of flowers on top in big pots, and then they have a full lane that's devoted for bicycling both ways. And it has an incredible impact on taming the streets and a huge impact on the city. So I know that biking has become a rabid activity in Little Rock, but it's just one design option that you might think about taking a look at. This is a really important principle. Make healthy choices the easy choice. And we came up with this acronym, safe, accessible, fun, and easy. Communities should make the healthy choice one that is safe. Public safety is a huge issue in terms of making a lot of low-income neighborhoods more amenable to walking. In Denver, we had a situation where in a neighborhood where kids who were within very reasonable walking distance of a school, their parents were afraid to let them walk to school because of the perception of crime in the neighborhood. So that we have to deal with the crime problem in order to facilitate that kind of basic exercise for our kids. So what are the real and perceived barriers for people to live active and healthy lifestyles? Planning and design create the hardware, clean, safe, beautiful streets with transportation options to make active lifestyles easy. And programming easy, fun, inclusive opportunities serves as a software to assist in changing behaviors. What are this slide just goes to illustrate this point. 23.5 million people do not have access to a supermarket. This is a huge issue in this country, and it's only recently been talked about. But we have this anomaly of both children and adults in our society who are both malnourished and obese. Think about that. And a lot of it is the limited access to good food that occurs in low-income neighborhoods, both in the urban areas and in many rural areas, sometimes just by virtue of their physical distance. So we really need to address the food issue as part of an overall strategy. Ensure equitable access. Vulnerable populations, including young children, seniors on fixed income, people with disabilities, and those with social and economic disadvantage are often face the greatest barriers to healthy choices. And I'll just make a point here. You know, one of the issues that we really delved into was the isolation of the elderly. Because if you have an elderly living neighborhood where they don't feel safe to go out and walk, they get isolated, and isolation leads to depression. And so we have this cycle of medical, clinical circumstances that are all really being driven by the physical and social characters of the streets they live on. So it's something we have to pay attention to. Another thing we can do is improve the location design of schools and affordable housing so there are real linkages and access. And that can have a real benefit for health costs and public expenditures. You know, I think one of the great underutilized resources in this country is our public schools. For budgetary and for other reasons, we're not using them as real neighborhood anchors to become you know, they could be kind of a captive asset, and they could be open more hours. Their facilities could be used by kids in the summertime, after hours, and this is not happening to the degree to which it should. And this just illustrates healthy ones across various income levels and racial and ethnic groups. And it's pretty devastating. You know, it really points out that as we live in, you know, our society and our development patterns are really driven around income and social cohorts that really produce some very substantial differences that we really have to address as a democratic society. Mixed use, and I'm not talking about mixed use buildings, I'm talking about mixed use mostly in terms of land use. We know that mixed use development is more efficient on the landscape. We also know that mixed use development makes people more likely to walk or use transit, to run errands, to go shopping, to go to lunch, or to go to other activities than an automobile-oriented single-use development. We have a plethora of outdated zoning ordinances and building codes that often bar developers from building mixed-use facilities. So we really need to address that. So the idea that we drill public health considerations into our zoning codes is not just about creating more efficient land uses. There's a reason for creating more efficient land uses. And it's really to create more walkability. Embrace unique character, and this kind of ties into the notion of finding ways to capitalize on community benefits that can be monetized for the economic development of a community, rediscovering community assets. Many towns and cities have discovered, obviously, their waterfronts or their historic neighborhoods. There's a huge movement on today to reconnect natural features or environments such as streams and forests that have been cut off from development. If you look at the city of Los Angeles and in Denver as well, where in the 1960s they paved all these arroyos, and now they're really had deleterious environmental effects, and it's a bad way to deal with stormwater. And we can recapture a lot of these places to be really productive for public recreation. And I would also say that embracing local character, and one of the things we found in this Denver neighborhood, which was about 80% Latino, is there was a huge tradition of gardening and food production. And these were families, some of whom had lived in Denver since before World War I. But the neighborhood was physically cut off from the rest of the city by a major arterial. In fact, the arterial divided the neighborhood itself. And so one of the strategies that we recommended as part of a kind of a traffic taming strategy was that would enable the community to really become more enmeshed with the fabric of Denver itself. And Denver, like Little Rock, is a huge biking area. So there was an opportunity to really open up the neighborhood to the city of Denver, have food festivals, have bike-aramas, all the types of things that would really help build a great place and build a great city. And you know, it was just like a light bulb went off in some people's minds. And I think that you're going to start seeing some terrific consequences from that. But the backstory to that is that type of activity can give a neighborhood a real economic lift. And so I think that's a very, very exciting opportunity. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, promote access to healthy food. Diet really is kind of the starting point when you talk about public health, particularly when you talk about it in the context of what a lot of folks regard as kind of the poster child of this whole discussion, which is childhood obesity. And there are a lot of things we can do there. We can rethink the grocery store. We can strive to integrate the full spectrum of healthy food cultivation, retail, and consumption, really ingrain that in daily life. The assumption that grocery store needs to have a large footprint serving an even larger market area may no longer be valid, and we're starting to see that, of course, in a lot of urban areas. But we need more rethinking on that and our whole food delivery system as it relates to many of these neighborhoods, particularly true in urban markets. I mean, even Walmart is rethinking their approach to the grocery store and utilizing smaller stores, and we're now starting to see multi-level grocery stores in cities like Washington. So that's all very promising. But food is an essential tool for placemaking, for neighborhood and ethnic identity, and this goes to what I was saying earlier. With historic markets being used as economic development opportunities, as well as encouraging healthy eating. Community gardens and urban agriculture policies, which is something close to my heart, along with cooking and nutrition programs, all promote kind of a rediscovery of healthy food. So we can make food part of the destination magnet. Finally, make it active. Urban design can be employed to create a really active community that encourages healthy lifestyles and maximizes opportunities for all residents to get physically active. We need to provide opportunities for adult exercise equipment, for walking tracks near children's playgrounds, and these co-locational factors are really important in design. We need to fill gaps in the pedestrian bicycle networks to create a continuous internet-connected system. I know you're doing some very exciting work here in Little Rock on that score. So here are just some kind of summary thoughts about the connections between health and value. Consumer demand for healthy places, walkable, vibrant places designed around transit and green space has never been higher. Numerous studies show that demand for compact mixed-use places are in such high demand that they achieve anywhere from 40 to 100% premium, more than traditional auto-oriented communities in sales and leasing. And this demand translates into value. Health is also an opportunity and a powerful emerging market for us, and it's a market differentiator. According to some research, homes located in neighborhoods with good walkability are worth $34,000 more than the same for less walkable neighborhoods. Homes near bike paths have a 10% premium. 68% of Gen Yers think proximity to a park is an important consideration, and 76% want walkability. And 84% of older Americans want to age in their own homes. So we think there's a huge opportunity here, and it's starting to be recognized in the market. This is a very recent cover of Builder magazine. So when a very relatively suburban focused group like the National Association of Home Builders starts talking about walkability, we know that somebody is waking up. I just mentioned briefly the concept of building communities around agriculture as kind of a conservation strategy, land conservation strategy. There are a number of these that are beginning to get some momentum. Agritopia, which is in Arizona, Hidden Springs outside of Boise, Idaho, Prairie Crossing, which is one of the oldest, which is in Grays Lake, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. Really a fantastic project and kind of a seminal example. Serenbe, which is a really fantastically interesting project in South Fulton County in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta, which I would encourage everybody to visit. And then South Village, which is a project that my firm is doing in South Burlington. All basically have a kind of a DNA encoded in them of land conservation, agriculture, walkability, health, walking trails, and eating well. But we need to spread that message. So here's what we know. And this was really a staggering epiphany for me. But we know that where you live has more influence than your genetic makeup. We also know that sitting is the new smoking. And getting people out of their chairs and moving is one of the best things we can do for public health. So here's what we need to do. We need to eat better, we need to move more, we need to eliminate tobacco, and we need to reduce our alcohol consumption. And I can attest to that personally. But we also know that place matters for health. So we believe that building for wellness is really the new frontier for real estate. That as builders and designers, we really are the fiduciaries for the next generation. At least for me, anything I build today is going to outlive my lifetime, and certainly probably my children's lifetime. So they're incredibly important. There's incredible import to what we build. And we really need to focus this conversation on what our children are doing and what their children are going to be doing. We need to rethink what we build, we need to rethink where we build, and we need to rethink how we build. And I would suggest, just a personal observation, and we were talking about this morning, I really think the most important thing is where we build. Because if we don't get where we build right, then nothing else matters. So we need to make transportation about moving people, not cars. We know there's a direct relationship between active transportation and obesity rates. We need to make the proposition, the business proposition, that there's a positive link between development and healthy communities and increased value. We need to unlock the value by doing well by doing good. And we need to make great buildings and neighborhoods. We need to think about health and sustainability at every scale that we build at. So when it comes to the overall health picture, I can't stress enough that the built environment is a really important part of the story. We can build our way to a better and healthier society, projects and communities that promote health and respond to changing market demands will see their value endure over time. That real estate leaders have a critical role to play, both on the public side, on the private side, and we need to be talking about partnerships, and we need to make healthy choice the easy choice. And I have to tell you that, you know, over the last couple of years, the really encouraging thing is that the generation of 20 and 30-year-olds that's coming up today, many of whom are now moving back to the cities and are really responsible for this incredible urban renaissance that we're experiencing nationally. You know, it started probably in the very late 80s or early 90s in coastal cities like Washington and New York and LA and San Francisco and Seattle, but it now is filtered across the land, and we're now seeing it all over the country, and you've certainly experienced it for the last several years, and it's trickling down to smaller communities like the one I come from. This generation is a lot smarter. They care a lot more about their health. There's a much lower propensity for car ownership, for driver's licenses. They're much more focused on mass transportation. They're much more likely to look for communal answers to community issues. So I think there's, excuse me, really great promise in this generation coming up that kind of sees the light a lot earlier than certainly my generation did. So just to close, I would just repeat Dr. Jackson's admonition that the development community really can be much more empowering in helping us achieve a healthier society. We can fix the problems before they start. I just add that we polled our own members at ULI on these views, and they all basically concurred that the real estate community has an important role to play in promoting health and wellness, and that the degree to which a project emphasizes or promotes health and wellness can affect its market success and economic value. And so we think that these values are really enduring. We just had a major national conference in Los Angeles, and we would love to get you more engaged with ULI on the subject. We have a conference coming up in Denver in a couple of weeks. This conference is going to really focus on The Terwilliger Center is an arm of ULI that's really focused on affordable and workforce housing, and we're really kind of trying to kind of drill down on how some of these considerations really need to be implemented in the creation of affordable housing. We have a few new publications coming out, Building for Wellness. And as you can see, we've got a kind of a long-term focus on this issue, dealing with at different community scales, dealing with everything from transportation to housing, and really this whole discussion is really all about linking everything together. So with that, I thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, David. We have some time for some questions. Steve, you got one right there in the back. Bob at the back. Yeah. And
you mentioned some cities that are doing some things right. Can you tell us a city or two maybe that may be comparable to Little Rock, North Little Rock, and might be a model for us in trying to be a healthier city or community?
Overall, well, I'm not sure that the comparability question is, I think there are examples to be learned from lots of cities. I think, you know, Denver has really kind of taken on a citywide strategy. Even Los Angeles has got a very interesting complete streets program. What they're doing in LA, they've laid out, as I understand it, about a 10 or 15-year plan. They're taking one major artery a year and putting in a complete streets program for several blocks. And what they've already discovered is that there's been an incredible explosion of real estate value along those streets, because suddenly the streets are amenable to retail, to outdoor restaurants and so on. So while there's some social and climatic factors, I suppose, I think you can look to a variety of cities for different elements of things to do. Denver, one of the interesting things that Denver is doing, however, is they're really trying to deliver this message across all arms of city government in a city that has actually a fairly decentralized form of government. For example, some of the things that the Housing Authority is doing to improve health at among its low-income residents is just something that would be really worth looking at. I think it's going to be a model for the rest of the country. And it's not just about building units, it's about social programming and education and engaging children and strengthening the link between those low and moderate income housing facilities to the local schools. And frankly, the schools are really nationally a real impediment on a whole bunch of fronts. Where we build them, how big we build them, how much parking we put in them, the kind of food we deliver, the hours they're open. I mean, I could go on and on. All the focus on education has been what's going on inside the classroom, but there are a number of elements, I think, that ought to be rethought about the way we kind of position our schools within neighborhoods and how we program them.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm Joe Wishart. I'm from Bryan, Arkansas, and we have a similar situation on a much smaller scale than the big city of Little Rock and a bigger city of Denver. The important thing that I noticed in your presentation was the paradigm. If we don't have a society that can change their paradigm and their mindset, then it is going to be very difficult to move forward in this endeavor. Folks have an attachment umbilically to their automobile. They don't make any difference if they're going a block to the grocery store or 5 miles to a ball game. I would love to have a place where I could take my granddaughter and grandson to play in a park and to go from there shopping and to go from there somewhere to eat and maybe to visit. So I didn't think I would ever be able to say this, but folks of my generation that want to grow old or older in their own home is becoming more and more and more paramount about being able to do this. So to be successful, it will take a great commitment from society, young and old, and from the business community to make a commitment for that change. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about what's going on in Bryant. We have an energetic and forward-thinking and progressive mayor.
I already know that.
Thanks.
Well, and let me say that I do want to lift up what's happening in Bryant. I think the attitude, the experience, the model that Bryant is setting is really very, very admirable. And for those of you that have never been to the village at Hendricks, and I'm sure most of you had, Ward, you've been there a couple times, it's just phenomenal. And now you can have Purple Cow and Boulevard and everything else around there that you want to do. It's really done a great job in Arkansas with these two communities. Dr. Bruce.
Let me just make a comment to that, because I think the gentleman made a very elegant point. I do think one of the real disconnects, as we talk about smaller communities, a lot of the change is starting to happen in much larger cities, and not exclusively, but there are a lot of smaller communities that don't really haven't gotten it yet or don't really understand it. And I think one of the best things that you can do is, for a small community, is to get your leaders out and have them look at the kind of before and after change that has occurred in other communities. If you don't get out and look and see what's going on and understand the best practices and get the right people in to advise you on the changes that you need to make, or the rethinking of your local code, or whatever it is, you know, one of the problems with this, one of the complexity of this issue is that you have this, I think you alluded to it, is that this interconnection of land use planning, transportation planning, social considerations, and economics and financing. It's very complicated. And people need to kind of understand the complexity of it. But I can't stress enough that the best way to convince people that there's a better way is to go see where the better way has already been put in place.
Yes, Dr. Bruce.
Little Rock has done a fabulous job of building along the river, but we have a crosstown freeway that isolates one section of town from another very poor section of town. There is a model that I've seen, however, in one of the towns that I've lived, Battle Creek, Michigan. It's a blue-collar town, cereal producing town. What they did is they had a number of isolated parks, which were quite nice, but people were poor and weren't using the parks very much. They developed a summer program of hiring kids to build what they called a linear park to connect all the other parks. They were sort of winding areas for that the kids then landscaped and developed. And as a result of this, they actually put these linear parks through all parts of town to connect the bigger parks. And because the kids built it, they owned it. They felt some ownership in it. And it was a total neighborhood development that connected parts of town that had never been connected before. It was a wonderful program. And the kids earned some money during the summer building the part of the whole thing. It was a great community project.
Well, you know, that's great. You know, I'd make two observations. One, parks are often located accidentally by virtue of where somebody gives the city a land. You don't see a lot of cities going out and buying large tracts of land, especially today. I would point you to Denver, which is doing the same thing. They kind of had the recognition that a lot of their parks were isolated. They weren't in places where there were big where there were dense populations, and they did a survey of the entire city and determined which were the underserved areas and which were the not overserved, but less well served, or where there was disinvestment in the parks. One of the things they discovered, of course, is that in the neighborhood that we had our panel, it was way underserved. There's a formula, I don't remember what it is, but it's like 100 acres for every 2,000 people or something like that, that is kind of a national standard. And they recognized that rather than going out and building new parks, they had a real opportunity to connect parks that would really make a better city. And I think you're going to see more of that around the country. The other observation I would make is, this whole issue of intercity freeways. I would predict in the next 20 years you're going to see a major physical transformation of many cities. They're going to tear down their freeways. Because here's one of the things we know. We know that when you build urban boulevards, you can move people pretty much at the same volume and speed as a freeway. But they're also a lot safer. They're also a lot better for the city. So, to some extent, this kind of got on people's radar charts when the earthquake compromised the freeway in San Francisco. And the city shored up the freeway, but didn't reuse it for about 6 or 8 months or a year while they studied it, and then they decided they were going to tear it down. Well, what that did for real estate values when they tore down the freeway on the Embarcadero and suddenly the whole city was open to the waterfront was phenomenal. And then they replaced a portion of that with some light rail. There are other cities that are now looking at that option. Milwaukee tore down a whole bunch of freeway. Rochester, New York, which is was just absolutely bifurcated by a freeway, is planning on tearing down its freeway. So there's a range of national examples. And the worst of the freeways, in many ways, are the elevated freeways. The notion in the 1960s, if we got these things up in the air, they wouldn't bother anybody. We were almost that naive. The fact of the matter is that unless you get them way up, like 50 feet, where you can do something under it, like with the stuff they've done under the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, they're a terrible influence on urban life. And so I think you're going to see a lot of cities really looking at reevaluating their freeway access, and it's been very advisable. I lived in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Washington, where the Southwest Freeway just completely cut the neighborhood off from the Anacostia waterfront. So what happened was Capitol Hill started to improve over a period of time, but the freeway just reinforced a racial divide, and the Southwest waterfront, Anacostia, was the most crime-ridden, poverty-concentrated part of town. Now, finally, that's starting to change. But just imagine what would have happened if we hadn't the freeway. The change within cities are organic, breathing, living organisms. And when you put a freeway barrier through it, it really restricts that natural economic development and progress. If we hadn't had the Southwest Freeway in Washington, we would have had a lot more economic growth in Anacostia, and we'd had a better city. So,
I know there are more questions, and so we want people to stay and visit with David. 2 final comments. Tom, remember when we were building the Clinton Center and the Clinton School, and people said they would never put anything on the other side of the freeway, and that people would not walk under the freeway to come to a facility? I think we've proven them wrong on that point. But the second thing is next Tuesday at 2 o'clock here, a Clinton School student team, which has spent a year studying bicycle and pedestrian access and opportunity in Little Rock, will present their findings. It's a pretty comprehensive and good report. So if you're interested in walkable, bikeable communities, Tuesday, 2 o'clock, open to the public right here. Let's thank David very much. Mayor Dabbs, Ward, thank you all.